A medieval Jewish scholar by the name of Abarbanel noticed another detail that supports the natural plagues explanation for the problem of Pharaoh's heart, both the injustice problem and the free will problem. Abarbanel points out that the text tells us consistently that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart happened after each plague was removed. Okay? So after God ends the plague and the suffering is over, then Pharaoh decides to stick to his guns. And what Abarbanel says is that the removal of the plague tempted Pharaoh to think that it was a natural phenomenon that came and went. Okay, so God not only chose plagues that couldn't convince a skeptic, and 2 unnatural ones that earthly magicians could easily replicate, and then 7 natural ones, not naturally occurring phenomena. But God also made the plagues go away to encourage the skeptical and obstinate king to remain skeptical and obstinate. Okay, so again, God hardened Pharaoh's heart not by reaching into his heart or mind and controlling it. He merely baited him like a chess player, playing on Pharaoh's rational skepticism. I'll end with a final observation about the function of the biblical author pre-announcing to the audience that God had intended to harden Pharaoh's heart well before the events played out. If you remember in the burning bush scene, he tells Moses that this will happen. And you'll see that this actually happens in the Bible quite a bit. The biblical author tells us that God intended to unleash Noah's flood well before the torrential rain starts. Okay. Same goes for the enslavement of the Israelites in Egypt. God tells Abraham that this is what will happen to them for 400 years. The same goes for the splitting of Solomon's kingdom. The same goes for the defeat and exile of the northern kingdom, and later also the defeat and exile of the southern kingdom. If the author didn't tell us in advance that it was a divine plan, audiences might mistakenly assume that the flood was a natural flood that destroyed God's creation against God's will, meaning that nature is stronger than God. We might think that Pharaoh was able to enslave God's people against God's will. We might think that the delayed Exodus was Pharaoh's doing, okay, that a mere man was able to battle it out with God for a pretty long time. We might assume that the Assyrians undid God's work by exiling the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, that God gave the land of Israel to his people, and the Assyrians undid it, okay, and so forth. So the pre-announcement of later developments clarifies that the later development in the story was part of God's original plan. Okay? So it serves one theological purpose, vindicating God against the perception that he's weak. But in doing so, it creates another theological problem. If God has already mapped out the future of human events, doesn't that mean that God does in fact control our every decision and every action? If the future is already set, then are we really free agents with free will? Can the Bible simultaneously insist that God directs history and that we have free will and we are therefore responsible for our own decisions and actions? Okay, so did you destroy your marriage by cheating on your wife, or did God preordain that? Okay, was it necessarily the end of your marriage, or in the future of your marriage, when the marriage was initiated? Did Thomas Edison invent the light bulb, or was that God's doing? Did you run over that pedestrian, or was that part of a divine plan? Did you lose 300 pounds, or did God, or did you just play a role assigned to you? Okay, and you can go on and on. Now, who's responsible for Tom Brady's 7 Super Bowl championships? Who's responsible for the Holocaust, the abolition of slavery, etc.? Okay, so we'll discuss this later on when we read the book of Samuel and discuss prophecy. Okay, so the problem that we discussed today is whether God is all-powerful, whether God has power over your heart. Another but related question is, does God know the future? And so we'll discuss that in the book of Samuel with prophecy. In our next meeting, we'll focus on sins and punishments. The Israelites' sins and punishments, and Moses' sin and punishment. The readings jump around a bit, or quite a bit, to cover the indispensable episodes of the journey in the desert, starting with the sin of the golden calf. This is Exodus 31, verse 12, through chapter 34, verse 35. Then the sin of the 12 spies and the sin of Korach's clan, which is in Numbers 9, 15 to 23, Numbers 11, and Numbers 13 to 16. And then we'll finish with Moses' sin, striking the rock at Mei Merivah in Numbers 20, and ending with Moses' death in Deuteronomy 31 through 34. So you have a good amount of reading, which we'll discuss together next week, so that's a full load. However, if you're interested, just for fun, we won't have time to discuss it, or to discuss these chapters, but if you have time and interest, please read Deuteronomy chapter 8 through chapter 9, verse 7, so 8 through 9, 7, and Deuteronomy chapters 27 through 30. They're not long, and they're really nice chapters in an Old Testament kind of way. And they paint a very vivid and fiery picture of harsh divine justice. So Deuteronomy is Moses' long farewell speech to the nation before he slinks off to die. And in Deuteronomy 8 and 9, these chapters I just suggested to you as additional chapters to read, in these chapters Moses tells the Israelites, and retells again, that they did not earn the land that God gave them. Okay? It is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who had earned it. Okay? God has lived up to his word, but the Israelites, the ones entering the land of Israel, and the ones who in later generations live there, they're in his debt. Okay? Because God did not promise this land to them, and yet they received it as a home. Okay? And Moses warns of the effects of comfort and prosperity. Okay? A warning that as the Israelites become prosperous and secure, they will feel entitled to what they have rather than feeling grateful. And so the speech is, in 8 and 9, is an exhortation to remain grateful and remain faithful to God for going beyond the call of duty and justice in giving them this home, giving them this land. What you'll see is that the repeating exhortation here, and also in Deuteronomy 27 through 30, where it's done with even greater ferocity, the exhortation is to remember. Okay? Remember. Okay? The only way the Israelites can remain grateful is by telling and retelling and retelling their national history, the story of the Exodus. In this context, please keep in mind that it is God himself who instituted the Passover holiday in the chapters we read last week, okay? Including the holiday's central ceremony, the Passover Seder, the ceremonial meal, okay? Which is, it's an annual history lesson about the Exodus, about the birth of the Jewish nation. Okay, so the meal is a history lesson, which includes audio-visual aids in the form of special foods that you're required to eat. Okay. This history lesson about the nation's founding reinforces the bonds of nationhood that bond all Jews to one another. Okay, the solidarity and brotherhood that Jews owe one another. But it also aims to remind them about the debt that every Jew owes to God. The history lesson aims to make future generations of Jews experience the Exodus vicariously and thus rekindle their sense of gratitude to God. Okay. See you next time.